Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Under the Banner of Heaven. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I didn't talk about it as much last episode, but I do like that they're constantly making this thematic theme, and I think it's more so because Alan is talking about the circumstances. Well, it bounces between Alan and Rob in this episode of how they're referencing the current state of everything and their view on things, and just how everything kind of not reciprocal, but how everything's kind of almost coming full circle to the persecution and the issues that they kind of had to deal with in the past, because a big heavy element to this episode is the laws of God versus the laws of man. And I think that was such an interesting way they've developed that story, and it just, especially how it revolves around the Laffertys, because now that was it Ammon, their dad, it's gone. Obviously Dan's in charge. I didn't really talk about that as much last episode, but I should have. But Dan's in charge, and wasn't it Robin's his right hand? But the fact of the matter is, and the moment, like, their dad left, some of the other siblings like, yeah, let's party. But Dan was like, hey, like, trying to rein his siblings back in, because he wasn't really prepared for it. It was kind of all thrust upon him. Then they also have, like, Ron, who's off doing his own thing, because he was never really... He always had to kind of go his own path, because he didn't always follow what his father wanted. Because it's like, right, what I want, my father will never kind of let me have, so I kind of got to go my own way. But he is still someone, and I love that line of, he is still someone that will follow the commandments of his father. And Jeb is like, which father? We're talking his heavenly father or his actual father? And it's like, and then all Alan could say was like, both, I guess. And I was like, I thought that was interesting. Because I think sometimes that line gets blurred in that family of, like, whose law is absolute. Because their father's like, oh, it's the Lord's, our heavenly holy father. But it seems like he's the one that kind of ran that family almost from a very tyrannical point of view. And I think that's what this story does an interesting job of. Like, I don't think this is necessarily an attack on all religions, but I think it's, like, focusing on, like, right, how someone with a very, like, old view who stays in a very almost draconian manner and way, like, all they see, like, someone who's on the most extremist lanes of using a religion to justify, like, what they do. So I thought that was interesting, because the family business, which I thought was interesting, knowing, like, oh, they have a chiropractic business, and the business ended up suffering because their dad wasn't around, and some of the customers are like, oh, we're more old-fashioned, and Dan was getting frustrated because it's like, right, he's trying to bring in a new way of doing things, because he started kind of like praying. The guy was like, whoa, what are you doing? He's like, no, I'm just kind of using the spirit to guide me. He's like, oh, because you don't know what you're doing? He's like, nah. He's like, no, trust me. Like, we're trying to make you better so that you don't have to come here so often. I mean, because if you were really getting better, you wouldn't come here so often. He's like, yeah, but I like... and I think that line of dialogue in it, so too, is the thing of just some people being so stuck in their own ways, not being able to kind of break free, and that in itself caused tension and issue between Alan and Brenda versus the rest of his family. Because once again, we talked about it at length last episode, how Brenda is so not what that like, because the family is kind of stuck in its way, and the phrase that constantly comes up, rightful place, that every man and woman is supposed to know their rightful place. But Brenda would never ever allow herself to be adherent to the role that someone would cast her in, because amongst the LDS is like, oh, a woman's role is a certain thing. You're supposed to kind of uplift your husband or something like that. And Matilda's in a kind of rough spot, because to help out Dan, she's the one that's kind of got to take over the books, to kind of like, right, the husbands, they can't focus on that stuff, so we handle the bills, the organization, all that stuff. But it was a little too much for not only Dan to handle, like, on his front, but also Matilda. It was a lot kind of getting thrust upon her. Especially when Dan starts throwing in the element of, yeah, we're not going to pay taxes. Like, taxes, and he's like, yeah, because we end up finding out from Alan that both Ron and Dan were part of an anti-tax group. It's like, whether you're like Patriots of Freedom or something like that. That's where you go like, okay, that seems like that could, like, I mean, I think everyone could go like, okay, generally, I think most people like, yeah, taxes, you know. But like the moment we started hearing about that, I was like, oh, that sounds like one of those extreme like groups that could borderline between a cult like militia that could end up being like, oh, some anti-government establishment. Which, like, I mean, again, you're like anti-government in some regard. I don't know. I was about to say, like, is there any way to, I don't know, because anti-government can be a very extremist thing. Like, I think, I don't know, that's why I'm like, it seems like, that seems like that's already tiptoeing in a very bad place. Especially because it's like, right, two of the people we got, Dan and Robin got in a car with, I think I might have said Ron before, but Robin and Dan, the person they got in a car with is someone with a beard, which they've heard that testimony time and time again from Alan, talking about that's the type of people he saw. And another witness was like, yeah, I saw these people too, but didn't get a good look at them. But said there was like, four of them, and we know at least two of them are some other people, but two of them were Robin and Dan. So I thought that was interesting. And especially like Matilda getting help from Brenda, who was trying to do what she could, because Matilda kind of felt like she was losing a little bit of like her connection to the Lord, because she's like, I couldn't hear the Lord's voice anymore. And it's like, oh no, it's not like a literal voice is what Brenda was trying to say, but she's like, no, I could hear the Lord's voice is what told me to come here and eventually marry Dan. And she says like, Dan told her the same thing, but she's starting to wonder, what if it was just her father telling him, what if it was just Dan's dad telling him to marry me? Because it's like, right, here's a woman who's kind of broken, because apparently they both were kind of messed up in their own regards. For example, like Dan would like smoke and had other issues, but he was also like, what was it like? Because the whole conversation is like, right, you can't really room in the eternal, like, you know, paradise and everything after the fact if you're a single male. So there's a conversation like Alan has about that, but it was almost like I thought it was interesting how Matilda talked about like, right, we are both people who are like, I forgot the exact wording she was saying, but we're both people bent out of place just to kind of fit together. And after they got married, Dan became perfect, but she's like, I'm the one that's still bent out of place. I don't want him to like ever leave me, because like, oh, I'm the, like, he's grown and changed and he's prospered so much, but me, I'm the one that's still kind of a little bent out of place, and I'm afraid he'll notice that. So she was hoping like, no, Brenda, stay by my side, keep me in line and everything. But then you also have Robin, who's keeping an eye on Brenda, because, and as Alan kind of, or I think it might have been Jeb who described it this way later on, it's like, oh, like Brenda's invasion to the family, because not everyone was so receptacle of it. Alan loved it, because he loved that aspect about her kind of wanting to pave her own way and build her own kingdom, and he never wanted to stifle that. Other people kind of would want to in the family, because it's about a person knowing their place. I even love Alan breaking it down. You know, it's like, right, men, not Mormons and non-Mormons, black, white, men, women, everyone's got to know their rightful place. And he kind of starts throwing a lot of that at Jeb, and Jeb's like, this isn't about me. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. And he even asked Jeb later on, it's like, right, like, you have daughters. Can you really say it's okay to like make your daughters, raise your daughters in a situation where like they are basically going to have to grow up in a system amongst, you know, LDS to be obedient to what a man wants? And he was just like, no, stop it. But it's like, because a lot of this is making him question his name, because it is a thing of when you're so close to something, all you see is the good in it, and you never see like, oh wow, there's actually kind of a shitty undertone to this thing that I'm a part of, that it is very oppressive to kind of put people in their place. Putting men at like the top of like hierarchy and stuff like that, because that even led to some conflict between Alan and Brenda's dad, because Brenda's dad's like, oh, like, who's the head of the household? And Alan was basically like, oh, my dad. And it's kind of like, well, that's where a man's supposed to be. And his dad doesn't like that. His dad's like, oh, that's kind of very like old fashioned of him, because he's like, Brenda, I want you to go off and use your education. But Brenda was kind of caught up on the fact of like, well, look at what the Laffertys have done. They have like a lineage dating back to the pioneers, but like the fact of the matter is all the siblings have kind of gone off and started their own business. So she's like, marrying into this family would almost be like royalty. And that kind of goes back to the point where Alan wanted her as far away from his family, but Brenda kept diving deeper, because I don't know what it is that she was necessarily searching for. What did she kind of get, did she drink the Kool-Aid or what it was? But it's just fascinating to know that Alan drifted so far from it, whereas Brenda drifted so close. And the question is why? But once again, like, not a lot of people like the fact is that Brenda spoke her mind. Even Ron, when she tried to offer like Ron advice about, oh, maybe you should help out, Dan and Matilda, but Ron was like, no, we kind of have to, I try to keep my family away. I got to look after my family first and foremost. Which I think that's such an interesting thing, because he's like, yeah, my family, even though it's like, right, Dan and Matilda are your family too, but it's like, no, we're talking about my family, my wife, my children. They've got to kind of come first. I can't be around all that energy that could be, I guess, have a negative impact on them. So I thought that was fascinating. It's just like the fact is he was kind of making that distinction, like, yeah, that's family, but this is my family. That kind of, their concerns and worries come first and foremost, but also like he has his distance from his family, but no matter how far he's from his family, specifically like his dad and stuff like that, he still listens to, once again, to what his father says. So I think that's fascinating. I also didn't talk about it, but I do like that Jeb had both Alan. I mean, it makes sense from an investigation standpoint, but he's not letting Alan know that he has Robin, and Robin not letting Robin know that he has Alan, because he's trying to get as much information as possible, because he's trying to find inconsistencies in their stories. Because, for example, Alan, they found his fingerprint at his house, because obviously it's his house, but I forgot what it was they were saying exactly, but I think they were saying like the doorknobs and stuff like that. They didn't find Alan's fingerprints or something like that. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it turns out he was covered in his wife's blood, because even though he lost his faith in that last moment, he was one last unanswered prayer to his Heavenly Father for his wife and his daughter, but they were unanswered, as I said. But then there's the whole thing about Robin, who obviously amongst all of them, it seems like he's like, I don't know if it's suggesting that Alan was suggesting, well, he was like, right, my brother would never stray because he is the most devoted. And I think, well, that was Jeb saying, like, right, could it be that your brother's so old-fashioned, so motivated by things being a certain way that when the time came, like, maybe he snapped on Brenda, who was an outsider, having a potential negative influence on your family, trying to change the way things are done in your family, change the way things have always kind of been amongst, like, the LDS. And so she was kind of this, once again, foreign invasion into their family to some extent. So that's what, kind of makes it seem like, oh, maybe Robin had something to do with it. Even Jeb asking, do you think it's possible that some of the people involved might not have been strangers? Are you certain? But he's like, right, there's nothing I'm certain about anymore after everything. I will never be certain of anything ever again. Back in the past, well, not far past, but Dan came back home at one point in time, and basically the cops had shown up, and an auditor has showed up to basically, like, because they hadn't paid some of their taxes, and notices were sent, and so he came to get some of their property as kind of taking some. And obviously Dan's like, right, who gives you the right to come here on my own property and do this? And he ends up like pepper spraying Dan in the face, and Matilda was like, no, I'm sorry, like, you told me not to pay those bills, and I listened to our almighty Father, and he told me that this is the right path. And he's like, right, because Dan kept being like, right, all of this, everything we're going through right now is a trial, this is all a test. And he's thinking like, right, you've always been able to hear the Lord a lot more than anyone else, Matilda, so if you say that's true, this is just another test by our Holy Father. And then Matilda saying like, right, I'm glad I listened to Brenda. And you could see Robin nearby was annoyed by that, because it's like, right, further influence from this outsider, corrupting our family, because he looked at her as a corruption, like something that was festering. Because he even said like the seduction of women, and how that can almost, like, he's almost making a comparison to like a sickness that can spread and rot out the core of what made their family, right? Because I think you can kind of say, like, currently Alan's the only one amongst his family who kind of has open eyes. Everyone else has kind of sipped the Kool-Aid. And and when you grow up in this, I think it takes a lot to really kind of break you of that, to kind of step out of the mode of what's kind of been built around you. And I think spending time with Brenda and her family, that's where Alan was like, right, I wanted to lean more towards her family rather than towards my father. And it's like, oh, why would you want that? Like, did you think she was in danger? And he ends up talking about, right, my brothers ended up getting a dog once. They didn't do their chores. How did my dad punish them? He took a metal bat from one of my brothers and he beat the dog to death as a lesson about responsibility. You're like, once again, this is some hardcore extremist shit. And you're like, wow. And he's like, I didn't want Brenda to be another example of responsibility as someone like her being so like against the grain of what's supposed to be. So, and once again, I think a lot of this is making Jeb question his own position and things, especially the conversation of like, right, do I put my wife in that position? Am I raising my daughters in this? Because he had then had that whole thing at the beginning about like the CTR range, choose the right. That basically, the conversation about like, right, once she gets baptized, you get rid of like the original sin, the baby sins, and then going forward, you have to be responsible for any like sinning you have to do. So you always have to basically keep this ring as a reminder to always choose right. And so I think for him, it's like, right, this is something he's been a part of. Now his wife's a part of. Like, was she always a part of it? I don't know. But you're definitely raising your children in it. And now this has got you questioning, like, right, have I been making the right choice? But you've been so maybe you've chosen not to see kind of the uglier side of the circumstances, because I'm sure everyone looked at the Laffertys, even Brenda, as like, oh, this great, I don't know if matriarch would be the right word, probably not, this patriarchy of a family, I guess, to see this family like seen in this right, because we don't know how the general, like, we hear about how they're like regarded, but we don't know how the rest of the town feels about the Laffertys, really. I even love that Jeb was asking, like, right, can you do stuff to help out with the girl's birthday? Like, I won't be there in time. And one of the sisters, she's like, oh, yeah, sure. She's like, sure. But she's like, also, I heard a rumor. Did one of the Laffertys got hurt? So it's like, right, they've been able to keep this tight lip as possible, but there are rumors drifting out about, like, okay, what's going on? But it seems like they've been able to keep most of the details under wrap. To be fair, it's only probably been, like, maybe, 2 days at this point in time, maybe. It's probably been only 2 or 3 days. So I wonder, this might be one of those things where it's like, this entire investigation might be told over a course of like a week or something like that. I always think it's interesting when once again, I'm a nut about learning the time frame of stuff like that. I always think that's always fascinating. Like, oh man, this story was told, like, I'm aware of a story that was told over the course of 24 hours. Well, there's the show 24, so but you get what I'm saying. Like, there was another story that didn't have that hour increment thing that 24 does. It's just something I read, a comment thing that was like, the story was like every season of it was just done over the course of like a school day, which I thought was fascinating. An entire arc and entire stories taking place over that time frame. So I've always been very, very fascinated with like knowing like how long it takes for a story. Like, for example, like more recent, like The Batman, that entire movie is told over the course of maybe a week or something like that. I always think that's interesting. But regardless, so that's why I'm like, maybe that's why they're able to keep stuff so tight-lipped, is because it is only the first few days in the investigation. Because it's like, right, we could make it like a public service thing of like, get the public looking out for these bearded men, but Jeb doesn't want to do it because he's like, right, we got to wait for the chief to come back. Side note, when that guy referred to Bill as chief, I'm like, I don't know how to take that as like, is that like chief as in buddy, pal? Chief, like, I don't know what your problem, like, I'd watch out, chief, but I took it almost like in the derogatory sense of chief. That's what I'm like, I was like, did he mean that in a derogatory way? I think he meant that, or was he just using it in the buddy sense? I don't know. Because Bill did correct him on, like, because the guy was like, oh, you're this, and Bill was like, no, actually, I'm this. So it's like, there seems that thing of, like, that's an issue. So I did interpret that chief, but maybe that's just me. Because Bill went to what was it, the more mountainous area or the wooded areas or mountainous areas to look for these bearded people, because it's like, right, we go and search up there because that's the only place those bearded people could be, because around town people would have noticed them a lot more, so it has to be like from higher up that they're at. So tries to talk to like one of the locals around that place. Turns out there's ammunition all over the place, because apparently there were people out there, like some guys up there shooting up a storm, and then there was like women with them and stuff who it seems like they're kind of more, what we glimpsed, it seems like are in more old-fashioned garb. And so the guy was like, actually, I've stayed alive by like minding my own business, and I know not to get involved in that. I would kind of tell you to do the same thing. Bill still kind of investigates and kind of gets caught up in something. He eventually like falls into like a booby trap that was set up. And the entire time I was like, please, Bill, do not get yourself killed, because this screams someone's going to pop out with a gun and shoot you. I mean, we see the ending, jumping ahead a little bit, where like he peeps through the hole. I was like, don't peep through the hole, and a gun barrel shoot. And I think you see at the last second he dodges before it cuts to black. But I think Bill's going to be okay. That's still too close for comfort. Because at the same time, this is all going down because like Bill was very clear. Hey, if you don't hear me from me about at 12:30, kind of send the cavalry to come look for me. And Jeb was like sending people out at that time to try and find out, and even asking Robin like if my officers are going to be in danger going up there. And it's like, well, they are a part of the system and stuff like that. It's like, what is your officers' intentions with my brother? Because Robin's still under the impression, not knowing that this is about Brenda's and her and Alan's daughter's death, so. But it's back to that conversation about, right, and then once again, the ties to the past where the laws of the Lord versus the laws of man, and how in the past, what was it, John and Emma and that whole situation. Once again, another dog thing. I'm like, oh, we're just gonna like that was god awful. You're just like, oh, choking the dog. I was like, oh god. And the moment he was like, oh, put it into this, I was like, he's gonna kill the dog, isn't he? I wasn't expecting him to shoot the dog. I thought he was just gonna continue doing what he's doing, but do it harder and just immediately snap the dog's neck or something. But it was like, and it's like, right, basically know your place, or I'm basically going to put you down like the dog you are. But then later on, they drag him and Emma out of their house, and it's like, oh, you're laying down with a woman that isn't your wife, yada, yada, yada. And we're going to like, oh, like, do you want us to cut out your tongue so you can't tell any more lies? Or do you want us to snip away part of your penis, because that way you won't be able to use it anymore to do such debaucherous, adulterous things? But luckily, the guy who's going to do the cutting backed away, but still, they were going to dish out the lawful punishment back then, and ended up driving them out of town. But when they were leaving, they were packed to the gill with guns. And I think we see a reflection of that today. It's like, right, they're impeaching upon us. So what we're going to do is we're going to arm ourselves, and anyone that steps on our property claiming to be from like the federal government, it's like, no, they have no say in any of this. The only power that we answer to is the higher power that is God. It seems like it's going to be that thing, and those type of situations can turn nasty and super bloody, and death could be around the corner of those circumstances. So I'm interested to kind of dive into that more, but there was also the situation, once again, more about Brenda, that situation with journalism, like she wants to be like, right, can't like women kind of talk to, and he was like, no, men and women, right, and he the guy, her boss or whatever, being like, oh, I see no difference, and she's like, okay, so, because he's like, right, it's about trustworthy, and it's like, right, can I ask you, who do you trust more, men or women? And he was like, oh no, I see no difference. And she's just like, well, can you at least like go to the higher ups and kind of give me a chance to show what I can do? And the moment he's like, all right, I'm gonna give you a shot, I'm like, okay. And then he starts doing shit and like locking the door. I'm like, that's not super creepy. I'm saying that uber sarcastically, and I was like, this is uncomfortable. And he turns on the camera, interestingly enough. I guess, I don't know if it's actually recording or not, but I guess it's just giving the pretense of like, all right, this is what it looks like if the camera was actually live or whatever. But I was like, because he was like, oh, you're good. And the moment he's like, oh, you should smile bigger. And you're like, okay, yeah, yep. But I was surprised with Brenda. But once again, she is very strong-willed. So she was like, okay, how do you think the higher-ups are going to respond to the fact is that you kind of locked me in here, and how if I talk to them about how uncomfortable I feel, we'll see whether or not they'd kind of choose my side in the situation. So she kind of leaves and doesn't make a thing about it. So obviously Alan was talking a little bit, but it seems like that was probably a story thing of we got to saw it. I don't know if Alan ever got to hear about what that was, because he was telling a story, but I think he was just talking about Brenda's resilience, and I think we as the audience got to see it, but I don't know if he actually knows that story, because he wasn't telling that direct story, I don't think. So that was interesting. It just kind of showed you she was so not ready to fit the mold of what other people wanted her to be. Her dad didn't want her to be what other people wanted her to be. It's like, I want you to be able to stand on your own feet, have your own life, and not just be adherent to like the man you married. Which I feel like I was like, wow, that seems super progressive. Like, what years does it take place in? Like the 70s or 80s or something like that? I was like, that just seemed super progressive for her father to have that perspective on things. I feel like even as a religious person, like, I wouldn't expect him to necessarily have that. But I guess it's like, right, because there is like the middle, like, you know, and I think that's a reflection of like not only then but even now, like that. Yes, you have your extremists, but there are also people who like have like, yeah, they have their beliefs in religion, but they don't go to such extreme routes. That there are people who are religious who have very progressive views on things. So it kind of took me by surprise that her dad had that. I guess for whatever reason, I thought him and Alan would have been on the same page, but he's like, I don't know about this Alan kid, especially when he set off the fireworks and there was a tree on fire in the backyard, and Alan's working with the kids to try and put it out with snow. So that was interesting. Definitely didn't score him any brownie points with her dad in that moment. But obviously we could tell, like, Dad always kind of had a feeling about that. Plus, Alan talked about it last episode. Apparently, he hit Brenda, but apparently it was like, it was a one-fight thing. We don't know the details yet. We got as much as he talked about it last episode, so that's about it. But kind of circling back to it, I went on a bit of a diatribe there. The fact is that hearing the way Robin went off about, like, oh man, like how it's going to be, like they're almost fighting this holy war, kind of continuing it from like in the past, like the persecution they had to deal with. Once again, God's law versus man's law. And it's like, right, we're here again. And, you know, if like any federal person tried to step to us type of thing, we're ready to go. It definitely seems like that group they're a part of is kind of like an extremist group that's kind of out in the woods. Once again, like very extremist, like religious cult-like group with kind of like a militia element to it. When Jeb was like, right, you like killed her, didn't you? And then Robin was like, wait, who are you talking about? So it's like, right, he had nothing to do with Brenda's death because he doesn't know about her being dead. Because that was the whole point, like, Jeb wanted to catch him in a lie to try and prove whether or not he was involved. But then he heard Alan screaming because Alan's kind of having some nightmares right now. So he said, wait, was that Alan? Like, tell me. And like, he's trying to call out to Alan. So that and then the Bill situation is where we left the episode off. So it's definitely going to be really interesting to see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. Like I said, I am curious whether or not going forward it's going to be one episode a week or they're going to drop like 2 episodes a week going forward. Either way, I'm excited to see where this goes and how everything plays out. Because I'm curious to also know like what the state of the family is. Because currently, like, we don't know like where the dad and the mom are currently, and we now know where Alan and Robin are. Like, they're in the police station, but like, where's Dan? Where's Ron? And where's like because there's like 2 other brothers. There's the one that Brenda was like really kind to. It's like, right, he was the one, the bloody hands with the squirrel. There's Rory Culkin's character. Like, so that's still 3 siblings, I believe, that are, well, and that's not counting Dan himself, so that's 4. But like, Dan might be up at that cabin that's shooting at Bill. So that might be where he is, but that's still like 3 we don't know where they are present day. Because I think all that stuff was like maybe a year ago or something like that. So crazy to think of just how much things could change and how, like, in that time frame things could lead to what they ultimately led to. So, and like I said, whether or not where their father is and all this, because he's off on his mission. But like, how long was it before he came back? Because Dan does have an emergency number, but he believes that this is his trial and tribulations to go through. So he's like, right, we're being tested. And if we turn to our father, we're going to, like, our earthly father, then we're going to fail our heavenly father in that regard. So we're not going to rely on our earthly father. We're going to do this on our own because we're going to pass this test that's been given to us. So I think just once again, just the fact is of people, like, when life kind of gets him, like, because Dan was unprepared for this, it was kind of all thrust upon him, so he's trying to not necessarily rationalize, but he's trying to, I don't know, I think it's that complicated thing of sometimes you're reading more into a situation than you should because you're trying to justify it. It's like, oh, why are things so hard? It's like, right, the typical thing is like, oh, it's you being tested. It's a trial. God only gives you as much as He knows you can handle, type of thing. So regardless, those are just kind of things flowing through my mind. Like I said, I'm excited to see where things kind of go from here. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.